Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Friday. I think it's time for Law and Legitimacy. Time just seemed to fly this week. Tick tock, tick tock. Wait a minute. TikTok's all over the news. And Mike's been telling me that I needed to be re-educated. I needed to go to thought control school. No, not really. I needed to be educated about the danger of TikTok because TikTok apparently can rewire the adolescent minds in ways that aren't necessarily good. Or does TikTok give China the ability to control what we think? Mike, why are you concerned about TikTok? I have to admit, I've never looked at TikTok. I'm not on it. I'm not even sure I know how to get on it. So this story is like way over my head. Educate me.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's less about TikTok and more about social media generally. I think you and I have talked before, and I think you and I just perceive the risk or the potential harm of long-term use via social media quite differently.
For young people, very young people, correct?
And well, I mean, but it starts young, and that's sort of the I think that's the main issue. Now, I'm far from a neuroscientist or a behavioral specialist, but I am a person who has been using social media tools as they have evolved from the very beginning for most of my conscious life, right? So when things like Zanga, Xanga, I don't know if you have ever even heard of Zanga.
I have. I don't know what it is, though.
So it's just early blog culture that evolved into what grew into MySpace, right? Those, people will now understand what MySpace is, and the meme of Tom, the gentleman that began MySpace, and MySpace gave way almost directly to Facebook, right? There was, as Facebook increased its market share, so went the utility of MySpace. And there was something unique about Facebook that brought the entire Western world into its fold in a way that social media, before it was even considered such, was able to do. For a long time, especially with MySpace, that was something that was unique to my generation. It was almost a way for us to convene beyond the watchful eye of parents and guardians and that kind of thing. And there was sort of an underground, sort of a subversive culture, but nothing. You were able to establish an identity online and not worry about someone coming in and reprimanding you for using the wrong language or liking the wrong things or whatever. But
I'm wincing because in my generation, where we did our subversive things, we'd find a wino outside a liquor store, get him to buy a bottle of Ripple, and then we'd go get crocked in a parking lot. I mean, and
it's not as if that stuff also wasn't
occurring. Okay, I turned out okay. What's the problem?
Well, I think the issue is, here's the difference between your era and mine. You didn't have the prospect of your friends taking pictures of what you were doing and throwing them online everywhere, and that was going on in my generation.
Good thing too. Yeah.
Well, and that was going on in my generation before there was any real legitimate appreciation for the staying power of those images and the consequences that those images might have on young people, in years subsequent to those interactions. A snapshot in time, an underage girl posing with a hypnotic bottle. I think we could probably all, reference one or more of those. But Facebook brought the entire world into the fold, and as it did, it brought transparency to all the generations that worked together, hung out together, friends, family, whatever. But then Twitter really began changing things like Snapchat, Twitter, and now TikTok. And the content on these platforms, Norm, has continued to I guess the half-life of the length of the content just continues to go down and down and down. And what has become clear over the last several years is that there is a barbaric nature to the way that social media and the way that the algorithm or algorithms, plural, curates and cultivates news and events and I guess galvanizes certain conversations. It affects people in real life, right? It affects the way that they perceive the world in a way that sometimes people or most of the time people are unaware of, at least from my perspective.
So Vivek Ramaswamy has called for restrictions, saying that if we can't sell cigarettes to children below whatever the threshold is. We ought not to permit them on social media, and for similar reasons. And I think you I think are inclined to support that. I expressed real skepticism about it when I first heard it, thinking that this was an imposition on speech. And you think I'm wrong. Tell me more. Tell me why.
Yeah. So I don't know that this is also something that has, I think, brought this back to, and just to acknowledge Gold Store, your comment. I love that. Life was so easier with Playboy magazine.
It wasn't. I mean, could you ever go to the drugstore and you want to buy one, but you're too embarrassed to put the money on the counter? I mean, oh, that was awful.
Well, I want to read this tweet from Vivek, and this was just a couple of days ago. He says, quote, "I had dinner with Jake Paul on Sunday. He changed my mind and convinced me to join TikTok. Yes, kids under age 16 shouldn't be using it, but the fact is that many young voters are, and we're not going to change this country without winning. We can't just talk about the importance of the GOP, quote, reaching young voters, end quote, while hiding in our own echo chambers. It's bad when the CCP collects data from the US users via TikTok, but the truth is that it's no better when American companies like Airbnb do the same thing by handing over US user data to China, and we're not going to get China to play by the same set of rules until we win this thing. I'll be there on starting later today." And here's my issue. I think that Vivek, aside from his inability to, like, he needs a like almost like a cool consultant, right? Someone that can actually just be by him and say, hey, the Eminem rap, don't do that. Jake Paul thing, like dancing on TikTok with Jake Paul, don't do that. And it's, just be you, Vivek. If any of your team is listening, you don't need any of that. I understand, the juxtaposition of putting Vivek in various younger demographics, but he doesn't have to do anything that he doesn't already normally do. Children and young people want to be spoken to the way that he's speaking to the rest of America. Believe it or not.
Address his claim that kids under 16 shouldn't be using TikTok. I mean, should we restrict them from reading the news too, because the news might be more than they can handle?
Well, I'll answer that by posting this on the screen. And this is from Scott Adams, who I think you have a great deal of respect for as well. Scott Adams replied to the tweet that I just had on the screen in a post, on X. And it says as follows: the TikTok risk is not data collection. The TikTok risk is that it gives China a user interface to control American brains. They control public opinion and distract us at will. Do you know why so many of our leaders think the TikTok problem is data collection and not brainwashing? Because TikTok is the user interface to American brains, and they trained our brains to see data collection as the problem. I assume Jake Paul explained all of that. And that is the reason that children under the age of 16 shouldn't be using it. I see this as a medical issue, as a health issue. And I agree with Scott wholesale on this. I don't think the risk of TikTok is data collection, not that it's not collecting or harvesting data, but that it is not a meaningful or statistical difference, and to a degree worse than any of the companies that are so-called domestic, right? That Vivek says, he uses air quotes around American companies are doing the same thing. My issue, Norm, is that the unseen influence on the developing mind is barbaric. And we are going to look back 25, 50 years from now and realize that this was something that needed to be dealt with in an intentional way, that this unrestrained access to these scrolling infinite timelines of content of all shapes and sizes is a little bit ridiculous. And I don't know what it's doing to our attention spans. I don't know if I could be convinced the other way to say, oh, this actually is a brain enhancing device. So I haven't seen any evidence for that. And I also think that we're seeing these pop-up riots and stuff from streamers. You saw the stuff that happened in New York. There is something sinister about the way that social media can be leveraged. And we also don't know who's controlling it, Norm. Right?
So let me play
devil's advocate. Twitter and all that. So anyway.
Let me play devil's advocate. We'll put a pin in this and return to it because it is a part of a much longer discussion. you sound like you're saying there's almost a public health emergency with respect to TikTok and social media's exposure to young brains, and that the state needs to step in to protect these youngsters from this public health threat. And what makes you different from the governor of New Mexico saying guns are a problem, or the CDC saying systemic racism is a problem, or whoever is claiming that climate change is a problem, and that we ought to go to the state or government to regulate and legislate in the public interest? Who determines what the public interest is? So, I mean, for me, freedom of expression things, what we put in our minds, that should be a decision that relates to families, not the government. And, you know, I obviously don't know a lot about TikTok, so I'm really ignorant here. But I get concerned when I see somebody looking to government to solve a quote unquote public health problem, because everything becomes a public health problem in the end.
Yeah, well, we've got plenty here in the Rumble chat that I think would be interesting to you. So a number of responses to that. One, I don't know that the speech issue is totally understood as it relates to social media and the First Amendment. I would love to say that the First Amendment applied to social media, but Norm, that frankly is not.
It's not a state actor, but state control of what you can access would be an impingement on what you can experience.
But what we also know is that the state had intelligence agencies embedded in all of our social media leading up to the 2020 election, right? So there is, I think that there is an admission through action on that part. There's no point. There is no point for the state to be involved at a layer removed from visibility, but in the way that it was in the lead up to the most hotly contested election in American history, without there being some knowledge as to the power of social media, right? The way that it acts on the dopamine receptors in the brain, what it activates, how it continues to this endless feed of information. And Norm, I think that there is a non-trivial difference between me and you in terms of the way that I perceive technology and the way that you do. And I think that is simply how we came to the technology that you and I share today, right? Our own personal relationships with this. There is something intuitive about what Vivek is saying that, and to be clear with anybody who's listening to me, and I think that it's a fair question. I don't necessarily like the question, but it's a fair question, Norm, to say what's the difference between me and the governor of New Mexico out, banning the Second Amendment or suspending the Second Amendment. I think that what I'm acknowledging is that there is that America as a whole is made lesser for its preoccupation or for the preoccupation of its citizenry on with social media. Right. And I think that there's something there. And Angry Dog says today's government only makes our problems worse. But I think things have been exacerbated. But I want to read a couple of things from Rumble video before we move on, and we will move on. It's Me Again says TikTok has brainwashed kids into having physical tics. It's driving transgenderism in young people. 25% of kids say they are now trans, right? Hans says there is a reason why Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and the like do not let their kids onto social media. I'm assuming you also mean Tim Cook, Hans, but Steve Jobs maybe as well. But I think that is perhaps the biggest tell.
Yeah, right? No, I hear that. I get that. This is a discussion worth pursuing. I mean, there's a fascinating new book that I'm halfway through, and I alert you all to it if I could just find it in my device here, in my electronic device that governs my world. And it is about big tech's influence and domination of us. It's called The End of Reality: How Billionaires Are Selling a Fantasy Future of the Metaverse, Mars, and Crypto, by Jonathan Taplin, Taplin. And, Taplin's position, he demonizes Musk. You and I are admirers of Musk in some ways. And he says, these guys really, they're hiding behind their algorithms and they're getting wealthy over it, while we, the sheeple, are increasingly becoming manipulated by what we're permitted to see. And
I really do. I think, and maybe, look, I do understand Don's point here as well. Right. Dawn says there is no way to have state control access.
Dawn, I'm with you, girl. I'm on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast. We got the country covered.
I understand this and I appreciate it. I think my issue isn't necessarily, I don't want to get lost in the mechanism that we use to mitigate it. I think that we should just first agree that there is a problem. And the problem is simply this: younger generations are developing brains. And if developing brains are being distracted and they are not learning to be productive, if their attention spans are being cut short so that they don't see things through, they don't learn how to execute, and they are at all times being inundated and pushed into some sort of autonomous consumer behavior that affects their physical reality, we have a real problem with the longevity and the sustaining of the American ideal right now.
All right, fair enough. We'll come back to it. Hey, so let's pivot real quick. I want to give you all a news date. I don't know what to make of this, but one of the Proud Boys, Ethan Nordine, was removed from the D.C. jail today, and his colleagues, one of them tweeted, or not tweeted, but texted out this morning that he's been taken back to the Prettyman courthouse. Federal prosecutors yesterday, in response to a rumor that there needed to be resentencing of Proud Boys, responded that only Ethan was coming back. There was a minor need to correct his sentence, but there's nothing on the docket sheet for Ethan Nordine today. So as we speak, apparently Ethan was sentenced to 18 years. He's sitting allegedly in the courthouse for an event that's not scheduled. I don't know anything about that. So if you have access to the courthouse or you know what's going on, I know CNN spotters are in the building trying to figure out what's going on. We'll report more as we have it. On the topic of Proud Boys, Charles Donohoe, who was Proud Boy number 6 in the indictment that led to the Proud Boys trial, became a cooperating witness and testified against the Proud Boys. Now that the trial is over and all the Proud Boys have been sentenced, his sentence has been scheduled, and it's been scheduled for December 19th. I'm willing to bet everything in the room I'm sitting in that he will not have a terrorism enhancement. And his conduct was more shocking than some of the men who were prosecuted. Donohoe was a cooperator. He'll get the benefit of cooperation. And this raises again the topic of the trial tax. And I want to talk about it very briefly and address a couple criticisms that I've seen of my attack on the trial tax. People want to refer to going to trial as a risk. You get a discount off the foreseeable consequences by entering a plea. So rather than a more severe sentence than a plea offer being imposed as a tax after trial, rather it's a reward for avoiding the risk of trial and the work that goes into it. Here's the problem with that analysis in the federal system. Because the federal guidelines are a point-driven system, there are already points baked into the calculation for what are called acceptance of responsibility. For offenses beyond a certain level, I think it's level 16 in the guidelines, a certain level of seriousness, you can get up to 3 points off the total offense level for acceptance of responsibility. That means for promptly acknowledging your responsibility and avoiding the work of trial. So the guidelines already bake in a discount for coming to trial early. My contention is the court and the government imposes extra penalties on people who choose to go to trial. Donohoe, was one who didn't go to trial. He was a cooperator, and the government will reward him for his cooperation. He didn't testify in that case. Another cooperator named Jeremy Bertino did, and Bertino acknowledged on the stand that he had repeatedly lied to the FBI. When he is sentenced, I guarantee you there will not be an enhancement for obstruction of justice for lying to the FBI. But yet, the government sought such obstruction points against those who did go to trial at their sentencing for doing things like minimizing their involvement when they spoke to the FBI. So I stand by my analysis. There is a trial tax. It's not just a discount, and the federal system proves it. And if you believe otherwise, persuade me, but I think you're just dead wrong. Hey, UAW, big strike. What's going on?
Well, we called this. I don't know if we necessarily
called
it per se, but as of this morning, we are watching. I guess what we can call a strike. If you read past just the headlines, it appears as though this is somewhat of a restrained strike for now.
A slow stoppage.
Yeah. So the UAW is the largest auto union in America, and
United Auto Workers, right? Yep.
and this is the first time in history when all three of, I guess, the three largest American automobile manufacturers have been subject to a strike simultaneously. So the issue, as we discussed, I guess last week or maybe the week before on the stream, Norm, is that obviously some years ago, the UAW agreed to get rid of certain pension payments for new employees. They got rid of all sorts of various compensation packages for new employees as they reworked their collective bargaining agreement with these automakers, and that has been to their detriment long term. So there's some hostility on the ground with the union workers. They are irritated with the way that the American manufacturing landscape is pivoting into an era and into a technology that they do not feel equipped to harness. That is electric vehicles, right? That is not gas powered motors, but the push by this administration to mandate electric vehicles. These workers don't feel as though they are being compensated fairly, and they don't really like the tenuous nature of their future under this new leadership, this new sort of governing regime that intends to change wholesale how these operations conduct themselves. So, from what I can tell, Norm, right now they've started at several facilities around the country, but none of them are attacking the most profitable business segments of these automakers. And I think that who's precariat?
Well, no, so I typed that in. Welcome to the precariat. This is a new concept. It's a new word I learned recently. If you live a precarious lifestyle, you don't have a union behind you, you don't have a pension to support you, you don't necessarily, you're living from paycheck to paycheck, and you're going to have to respond to the incentives in the marketplace as you can find them. And this is mostly people working in the gig economy. And the UAW is being pushed into the precariat, is what I hear you saying, Mark. Mike, the precariat is that class of people who aren't really stakeholders in settled expectations and in institutions that support them. And so the UAW is concerned that the shift to electric vehicles is going to displace manufacturing jobs that for many years were the staple of Midwestern communities.
Well, and that's not an unfounded concern. I think there's also concern over the value of the work that will be tendered by union workers when these transitions are made, if they're made. Now, anyone who's talked to me privately or even heard me talk about this stuff on the stream for any length of time knows that I think the EV stuff is one of the biggest scams of the modern era. And I don't like specifically that our government is in the business of distancing the individual from energy independence on their own, i.e., energy cannot be freely stored in the way that gas and oil can be stored. You can't go down to the gas station. You can't fill up a canister of electricity and have that with you when you're traveling, right? I think that there is a larger systemic issue that needs to be looked at when it comes to this push for electrifying the United States infrastructure, whether it's fleets of vehicles or just the general power grid via sources other than fossil fuels. But you're not pushing fossil fuels out of the equation. You're just pushing it farther up the value chain away from the individual consumer. So I'll get off my soapbox on that, but it's a huge scam. Anyway,
I think it's an important point that you raise. As you were talking, I kept hearing Klaus Schwab and company saying, "You will own nothing, but you'll be happy." And so if we can create a global electrical grid, that you have to get state permission to enter by using your digital currency, and the digital currency can ration when you can get it, how much you could get, whether you can get it. Increasingly, we will be subject to a collective mandate about what's in our own good, what's in our own interest. And the algorithm will determine who has access and how much access to the things that are vital to life. The terrifying thing is, those of you who are listening to Law and Legitimacy, Mike and I, we're dyed-in-the-wool contrarians. And so at what point does the algorithm decide, hey, these guys are more trouble than they're worth, and they hit the off switch? And without access to independent energy sources, without access to cash, without access to markets that individuals interact in, you're left with nothing but exchanging collective tokens in a publicly managed space. And some people think that's a great thing, but there's a terrifying dystopic possibility in that conformity will be rewarded and dissent will be punished and dissent will disappear. That's at the heart of every dystopian novel. And we've said it here before, we'll say it again. The promise of a dystopian novel is that, if you get along, you'll be fine. Take your Soma in Huxley's Brave New World. You'll have a great time. But what if you don't want to take Soma? What if you'd rather endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and create your own sense of significance? You might not have the means to survive to do so. And people like Alex Jones, who talk about the New World Order or the Great Reset, that's what they're talking about. And I think you ignore it. It's easy to say, well, Jones is a crank, that kind of thing. He certainly has had some cranky ideas, but his concern with globalism and the converging factors in the distribution of labor, in the distribution of information, and in collective control of our experience of the world is dead on as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So what I've got on the screen, Norm, and what you're saying is correct. I don't want to go off like on a tangent again, but it's difficult for me to resolve what we're talking about now and not see, I guess, a connection to the tweet that we put up earlier in the week where it said, in order to live like boomers, millennials will literally have to enslave Zoomers. And my commentary to that was that it appears to me that Zoomers have already been primed sufficiently to accept that role. And this is all tied together in my head, right? Not knowing what energy independence at the individual level really means. I can't power the IROC with a battery charger on the wall, right? And I don't want to. But most young people that are engaged in this ubiquitous scroll of social media, Norm, that you're worried about, being sort of the end of free speech as we know it. These people have been programmed to be completely ignorant of their own individual sovereignty, that the ideals that this country was founded upon. And that ignorance is a huge darkness looming on the future of all of us that continue living past the next 10 to 15 years. Anyway, Biden is reportedly set to address this strike. I just want to call back our criticism of this UAW strike and the hypocrisy that underlies it from the last stream. President Joe Biden got the support of the UAW union in 2020. In that election, UAW pledged its support for Joe Biden. This was on his platform. This isn't new. When he took the stage, that night, it was a Jeep commercial. Does no one remember that all of these manufacturers were on board with the current regime that is now shepherding in this green energy, Green New Deal policy of electrifying all of our infrastructure? So I think it is incredible. It is incredible right now that they're just now waking up to this issue of, oh, well, what's our future if everything becomes electrified? If we're having, we need to be protected. You could have done that beforehand, but maybe it's because you had a DOJ monitor in your company for the last maybe 4 years before that. But anyway, I'm getting irritated.
No, well, the Bill of Rights, I mean, we talked, I mentioned it earlier in the week. We'll do more on this later. The Bill of Rights are under assault. We just went through the anniversary of 9/11, where we were encouraged to trade safety for security for liberty. And I think most people would make that trade. I suggested and suggest that, in the same way that Mary Midgley talked about social contract theory and classical liberalism being a reaction to the divine right of kings in the early 17th century, our time, we seem to be undergoing a paradigm shift where there's a rising cadre of people who don't think that individual liberty matters, that collective security should be the norm. We lack the intellectual infrastructure to support that and still have a constitution steeped in the Bill of Rights. But plenty of people are critical of the Constitution, claiming that the rights it guarantees are anachronistic and are inconsistent with human flourishing. That would be the World Economic Forum. And so the battle for our times is very interesting and can be waged in the trenches, as the UAW is doing it, or at higher levels of abstraction, as we will endeavor to do here from time to time. But I think the UAW, wake up, guys. I mean, sometimes what is it? What's that great song from Joni Mitchell? Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you got till it's gone.
That's right.
And the UAW. I come from Detroit. Grew up there if I grew up, I was an adolescent in Detroit. Well, no, I was a chronological adolescent in Detroit. I'm now a geriatric adolescent in New Haven. But the UAW offered security to people. You if you had a high school degree, a diploma, you could go make $20,000, buy yourself a little house in town, and have a small cabin up north with a truck to drive to it. And this was the norm. This was the expected norm. In exchange, you obviously went into the factory and the union fought for you, but you never thought that there wouldn't be that safety net to fall back on. That has been undermined in our time. And I think for the current generation of UAW workers, they may be looking at the end of the line, and we need to fight to retain the sense of security.
Thanks. Yeah, just a couple of parting thoughts here. Yeah, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Will, thank you. Jackson Barrett says the United States of Amish. I'm reminded of this little, I guess, pregame last night before Thursday night football. Marshawn Lynch went and hung out with an Amish community. For what reason, I don't know. But the Amish seem to have things figured out in a way that most of us do not, or most of us don't appreciate. One more thing here. I think I put on the screen just some of the bottom line issues right now. Up at the top here, it talks about the unprecedented demands of building electric vehicles, but I think UAW is seeking 36% wage increases across the board, Norm.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, me too. Yeah,
I think they've been offered from these various manufacturers of the three, anywhere from maybe 17.5% to upwards of 21%. And so, we'll see what goes on with that. But I saw a comment on, I believe, Rumble, where someone said that they are protesting I guess, a $46 million salary to the CEO of perhaps Ford. I can't verify that that's the CEO's salary, but I'm always very reluctant to criticize a number for the sake of the number. When it comes to people in a position of chief executive officer of a publicly traded company, with the reach and scope and demands that I know are attendant to someone in that position. However, I will say that the optics aren't great. And that Ford isn't exactly doing a lot good these days on the public market. So perhaps that there is some criticism there to be had. And the last thing is, I think that, Norm, me, I'm not a big union guy as well. So I'm quick to call out the hypocrisy of those who would collectivize their interest and put them in the hands of a few that make erroneous and terrible decisions on their behalf, and then cry about it after they have done so. Anyway, I'm done complaining.
We're done with another week, folks. So we're going to shift to some premium content soon for those of you who are followers. And we're going to move our law school project to that. I've encouraged all of you to go out and buy this wonderful textbook, The Constitution of the United States by Paulson and Company. We've gone through a couple assignments in it. We'll start again next week. And we're going to march you through this book so that you understand what our Constitution is, at least from a lawyer's perspective, and you have the ability to make intelligent decisions in your choices of lawyers and in your choices of vocation, in how to wage public fights about the public good. Because if we know one thing in this, the best of all possible worlds, our world is spinning out of control, and it's our responsibility to manage it, and we should. So, thanks for listening this week, Mike. How do people find us?
You can find us at Law Pod Daily on X, and Uncle Pat, I do know. Evil nonetheless. You can also find us on Rumble Video, YouTube Live, those platforms. We are live every weekday beginning at 8 a.m. Eastern. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find podcasts. Norm, I think I got some criticism in a group message that they don't know I'm monitoring right now. They're talking about how how shitty I look, and that we need to stop taking so many days off. Anyway, shout out to you guys, because I know
you don't sound good today. I know you're struggling with a cold, but I wouldn't say you look shitty. I'd say that.
Oh no, I'm handsome. I know that, but they got to say something to bring me down.
You must have a screen on your device that I don't have.
Good luck to everybody playing in Ball and Legit, Ball and Legitimacy's fantasy football league this week. I know I am. I got a lot of points dumped on me last night by two players, but TJ Hawkinson for the Minnesota Vikings dumped all over me. So I've got to dig out of a hole. No doubt we will.
Norm, memo to Josh Allen: no interceptions this week, and try not to fumble a pivotal snap. You were my first pick for a reason. Your performance last week was not that reason.
Ooh, that's tough. Anyway,
that's tough managing the team. I mean, Josh, come on. I'm paying a lot for your salary there.
Oh man. Anyway, Norm, I will see you on Monday morning. Thank you everybody for tuning in as always. Chip off the old Boyer block. That's right. Anyway, talk to you later, Norm.
Oh, be well. Get some rest this weekend.
Oh, I will.
Like feces.
See y'all.